Well, welcome everyone to, I don't know if we have an official name for this session. I think we're just calling it everything HR needs to know about mandatory vaccinations. Thank you for joining us today. We usually do this on a Friday, but we figured this was so important and we wanted to get ahead of everyone else in terms of recording one of these things. We're doing it on Wednesday. My name is Eric Meyer. I am the publisher of the Employer Handbook blog. I am also a partner. This is going to be a consistent theme. And in the employment practice group at Fisher Broyles LLP. And let me go around the wheel, Brady Bunch style. I don't know how this is going to look on YouTube when you see it later. All I know is just if you're watching this on YouTube, please like, and comment, and subscribe and all that stuff. But let me go around the wheel, Brady Bunch style, to the gentleman who's never joined us on one of these before. Sid Steinberg, how you doing?
Eric, I'm terrific. And so I am Sid Steinberg. I'm also a partner at Fisher Broyles. I'm the monthly employment law columnist for the Legal Intelligencer in Philadelphia and the former chair of the DRI Labor and Employment Department as well. So, or group as well. So very happy to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Sid. And going to my diagonal, to Sid's left, is Amy Epstein-Gluck. Amy, it's great to see you.
Hi, Eric. Nice to see you too. I'm Amy Epstein-Gluck. I've been here before on the famous YouTube channel. I am also a partner at Fisher Broyles. I'm the firm's employment counsel, and I am the author of the employment law blog for Fisher Broyles. It is great to be here to talk all about COVID workplace issues with you all.
And finally, finishing off our quartet is David Renner. We have three Pennsylvanians here. Well, actually, technically I'm sitting in New Jersey, and actually Sid's at the shore right now, so he's technically in New Jersey. We outnumber the Pennsylvanians. But David, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Hey, thanks, Eric. I think this is my second time appearing on this famous platform, but I'm David Renner. I am consistent with our theme, also a partner at Fisher Broyles, practicing in labor and employment law. And it is great to be here and looking forward to talking about all things COVID vaccination related.
Perfect. So before we get started, let's do the disclaimer and all that kind of stuff. First, I had everyone's volume muted, and you won't be able to unmute. It'll just be more orderly that way. Not that we wouldn't love to hear from each of you, but we really don't want to hear from all of you today. But the way we do want to hear from you is by using the chat feature. So if you have questions, comments, someone gave a shout out to Fisher Broyles. Awesome. You don't have to shout us out, our firm out, but you can certainly ask your questions. We'll try and monitor the questions using the chat feature. And when we answer your questions, we're all lawyers, but you have to assume that we're treating your question as a hypothetical one that you're asking for a friend. So we're not giving actual legal advice. It's just kind of this metaphysical way, whatever. We're not giving actual legal advice. We're not answering anyone's specific questions. We're not creating attorney-client privilege. We're just having fun, giving hypothetical answers to hypothetical questions and trying to tell you everything you need to know about mandatory vaccinations. So with all that, let's get started. And I want to say the impetus behind doing this was Sid. I got to give Sid some credit. He was the one who came up with the idea of doing this, and the real issue, and I'm going out of order off of our outline, is accommodations for mandatory vaccinations, but specifically religious accommodations, because those seem to be the toughest ones with which to deal. And Sid, what are some of the issues that you're encountering with clients dealing with religious accommodations for businesses that want to mandate vaccinations?
So, Eric, the very specific impetus for this was I was working with a client in their mandatory vaccination program, and we put out the form. We sent that out. They sent that out to their employees, and they got back a mimeographed or Xerox, that shows my age there, mimeographed, Xeroxed letter from someone, I think it was from the United Church of God or something like that. And a very quick Google search, it literally was the date of your post on LinkedIn about this. A very quick Google search showed that the pastor Fred, or whatever his name was, doubles as a dog trainer in Wisconsin. And it was very clear because there was some identifier for Wisconsin, and the employer called me back and said, "Well, what do we do with this?" And so that kind of prompted the question of, what are we doing with these religious exemptions? And I know we're going to get into the questions of sincerely held beliefs, and the questions of, is this consistent with an overarching philosophical approach, which is kind of how the courts look at it. But that was the first impetus to that. So I won't hog it. I know we'll get back to how we're going to address those questions, but it was, dog trainer in Wisconsin has now become my consistent reference of these fake religious exemption requests.
So Amy, piggybacking off of that, realizing that dog trainer in Wisconsin could be someone's, get out of vaccine free card. Let's take it back to the basics, right?
Sure.
Religious exemptions or religious accommodations to really anything. Before we even get to the accommodation part, and we're looking at what is a sincerely held belief under Title VII. What are some of the things that you're looking at, whether it's in the vaccination context or otherwise?
Right. So sincerely held religious belief under Title VII, you're really checking to see if an employee has, if it's based on a real religious belief, practice, or observance. It doesn't have to be one that you agree with or that you think is that you look into or research. It doesn't have to be a traditional religious view. It really encompasses all aspects of a religious observance. Now, it gets tricky because what Title VII doesn't protect is when an employee has a personal or philosophical objection to receiving the COVID vaccine. There's plenty of case law on this, that religious beliefs are different from personal beliefs or political beliefs or social beliefs. And the other aspect about religion is, you have to provide an accommodation unless it would be an undue burden. That undue burden standard is much lower with religion than it is with a disability. It's really like a de minimis amount of undue burden can occur before you can say, okay, well, we can't accommodate this. But there have been some things that I've been surprised about, like veganism as a religion. And, I think it wouldn't count if we're talking about the Holy Church of the Internet for $19, we'll give you a religious exemption. I think HR professionals want to take these, objections seriously and ask about it. But definitely you can ask for accommodation. You can ask for documentation and look into that if you have time, depending on your size, depending on the size of your company.
David, how many clients have contacted you about, gosh, this thing looks really funky. Like, we really want to push back. It's almost the principle of it. We want to push back versus the client saying, all right, fine. They give us something. Let's just move on to whether we need to accommodate.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a little bit of a mix of both from clients when it comes to that. I've had some clients that have basically said that we will accept any type of, and not question any type of, religious exemption request, just so they don't have to get into the, what I'll call, very murky waters of, frankly, questioning somebody's sincerely held beliefs, particularly about religion. I mean, what they say, one of the best ways to lose a friend is to start talking about religion. And that's one very quick way to start ticking off your employees, is to start questioning, their religious beliefs. And then I've had other clients that have had the, to your point, nope, we're putting our foot down, we're fighting every single one of these, we're going, we're going to go and look in and dig deep and really, really question what is being asked for in the religious exemption, and seeing whether or not these beliefs truly are sincerely held. And I've had a lot of cases, and I think there's a lot of similarity here. Litigated a number of cases on just the general influenza vaccine cases and the mandatory flu vaccines that a lot of employers had pre-COVID, and still do have, and getting into excuse me, those issues, and well, is this employee just picking and choosing which parts of their religious beliefs they want to abide by, or does the Holy Church of the internet really do say you can't get vaccines, or is it one tenant out of 10 and you don't follow the other 9? So there's really there's been a large disparity in terms of what clients have been doing and what they've wanted to do once they get or are faced with these requests.
Same.
Sid, as soon as we started talking about this, who's got a sincerely held belief and do you push back on it, I saw a bunch of questions pop in. They're all the same. What sort of documentation do we ask for?
So it's interesting. So two parts to that. There's the sincerely held belief, and then I look. You mentioned I'm in Philadelphia, so I look at what the Third Circuit has said, and the Third Circuit has done a lot of essentially what is a religious belief. And one of the things they talk about is that the belief that's being expressed is part of an overarching system. Okay? So that now, I will also tell you the Third Circuit has specifically said a letter from clergy is not required. Okay? So although we may well want it and we may well ask for it, the mere fact that somebody doesn't give it to us isn't going to alone be the speed bump there. But the issue that I have been intrigued by and thought about, and I know we're going to bounce around, is virtually every major religion other than Christian Scientists has affirmatively come out and said, we believe that adherence to our belief, whatever it is, should be vaccinated. Obviously, the most prominent is the Pope, who has come out for that. Then you have person X who comes to you and says, look, I'm a Baptist. And I'm just picking that out of 8,000 religions. And I don't believe in sin. I believe that harming my body or having injections or whatever it would be is a sin. Therefore, it is my religious belief that I should not get the vaccine. You go on the internet, it says Baptist Council has said you should get the vaccine. What are you doing at that point? I'll tee that up. I have an answer, but I'll let somebody else jump in for that.
Who wants it?
You take it, Eric.
I'm good. I'm good. Sid,
Well,
you answer your own question.
Yeah, I mean, okay. So I'll answer my own question, which is, I would say in that context that that going, depending on how hard and how tough you want to be about this, but if you really want to scrutinize it, I think I would look at that and say, look, it's contrary to the overarching belief. And how would you establish that this is part of, again, going back to the guidance of the courts, part of the overarching belief? And if you look at it a little bit further, how would the person establish, let's assume you wind up in a lawsuit over this. How would the person establish that this is part of the overarching belief when you hand them the press release from the most senior member of whatever church it is, who says, absolutely, you should get the vaccine? So from my perspective, if you're contrary to the published teachings of your faith, I think you're on reasonably solid ground to say this is contrary to the overarching belief of the of whatever religion it would be.
I had that happen to me. Just a random person called me who asked me about vaccinations. It was clear from the conversation that he was unvaccinated. And I asked him, I said, why are you unvaccinated? He said, well, it's religion. And I said, what's your religion? And he said, I'm Catholic. And I pushed back and I said, look, literally the Pope had just been, news the day before that the Pope had said, there's nothing wrong with getting vaccinated. There's nothing in the Catholic teachings that says don't get vaccinated. In fact, it's just the opposite. We want people to get vaccinated. And I just pushed back with that. And all of a sudden he pivoted into, well, it's under an emergency use authorization. So then it wasn't religion, right? So I think a little bit of pushback is not a big deal. A couple people have.
I think it also depends on your workforce. I just want to make that point. If you're talking about a workforce with 20 people who are distanced and they're not shoulder to shoulder like in the stereotypical meatpacking plant, that's going to be a different level of pushback that you do or you don't want to have. You have to assess as HR professionals really the safety risks. Like you're trying to ensure that the workplace remains as safe as possible. And whereas these exemptions and accommodations exist, it's a holistic consideration. Sorry, I'm used to being on a podium. It's a holistic consideration of safety while accommodating for religious issues as well as medical.
Yeah, there were a couple of comments that I just want to highlight. Annie asked, what about someone claiming an untruth? For example, a religious stance of getting a vaccine that has in its ingredient list aborted fetuses, right? You don't have to accept that. You can push back on something like that when someone is just blatantly saying something that's untrue. Don, one of my favorite blog readers and really great attendee at these Zoom sessions, notes that the EEOC goes beyond traditional religions. According to the EEOC, religious practices include the moral or ethical beliefs as to what is right and wrong, which are sincerely held with the strength of traditional religious views. So if someone doesn't have a particular religion, right, but they just have strong views, that may be enough.
I want to jump in for 1 second on that. And I'm glad Don raised that because that's exactly the EEOC guidance that I was thinking of when I mentioned veganism can be a religion. I know there was a court case on that, and I think the EEOC guidance mentioned that court case. So you could see it gets so tricky on what's moral, personal, social, political versus religion, and it's not a traditional religion.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, Don.
And also too,
go ahead, David.
Even though the EEOC has their guidance, and I think that that guidance, because it's the EEOC, carries a lot of weight around the country when looking at the Title VII. But I think while I will admit I haven't looked at every single circuit, the circuit courts have adopted in some cases differing views than the EEOC in what may or may not constitute a religious belief. So what just because the EEOC says something doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be right for you in your within your specific circuit. And state courts also have the states have their own laws in some cases, and they have taken some differing opinions than the EEOC as well. So you got to obviously watch out for those.
Yeah, and I think there's a Supreme Court case about the can't be personal, social, political.
Right. And Amy, to your point about how hard are we pushing back on these issues as well? It was interesting. I was on with a client, 2 lawyers from the client, and they had a conversation with me on the phone or on the Zoom call as to, are we doing this for show or do we mean it? And that was a legitimate question, because if you're just doing it to say, we are mandating, but we're going to be fairly lenient, that is, we don't want to be the tip of the spear in terms of the next court case on this issue, then my suggestion is, if you get some plausible religious exemption, something in writing, doesn't necessarily have to be from the the clergy member, but something in writing that puts something coherent together, then you're probably going to accept it, because it's just not worth the energy to push back that hard. So again, it's a sliding scale, and there's no doubt 6-8 months from now, there is going to be a case coming out of these issues, and we're going to be readdressing this religious exemption and what is it, and where are we drawing the line.
A lot of talk in the comments right now about the mark of the beast. Let me tell you about the mark of the beast. That can lead to a really lucrative lawsuit. I remember a jury awarded someone in the Midwest well into the 6 figures on the mark of the beast lawsuit, claiming that a hand scanner would imprint the mark of the beast. So they wanted an accommodation to get around a hand scanner to come in. Maybe it was a retinal, I think it was a hand scanner. And allegedly the company said, no, we're not going to do it. And a jury awarded the individual well into the 6 figures. So the lesson there is, to Sid's point, you may not be familiar with someone's religious beliefs or their religion, but if it's plausible that what they are articulating to you is a valid religious or sincerely held belief objecting to the vaccination, move on to interactive process. And let me pose this to everyone here. Are we in general consensus agreement here that it's pretty easy to accommodate someone, whether it's religion or disability or pregnancy, with respect to mandatory vaccinations, that is mask or other form of PPE, social distancing, or remote working? I mean, is there any situation you can think of where that's not a reasonable accommodation?
I mean, I would think that in the service industry with restaurants, service people, it would be really tough.
Yeah,
You know,
I mean, I think oh, sorry, go ahead, Amy.
No. I mean, I don't know how you get around that. You could say that an unvaccinated server will only be, serving people outside. But I think that would be really, really difficult.
What about throwing in that you have to be tested every day?
You have to be tested. Oh, you have to be tested. Oh, yes, I agree.
Yes.
Yes, agree.
But throwing that in, which,
or weekly or some reasonable regular interval. Yes, I mean, I think that is now baked into the accommodation. It's PPE,
Sure.
mask, it's social distancing where feasible, and regular testing. I mean, that's literally what the government is doing for its public sector employees. That's what what New York City is doing, California. Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, and
or potentially working from home. David and I discussed that. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, no, I mean, to go back, I guess, to the original question, Eric, that you posed. I mean, I think, I think generally, yes, it is pretty easy to accommodate, on the vaccine front. But I think that's said with the caveat that it's going to depend, like Amy pointed out with the service industry, what does your workforce look like? Do you have to use Amy's example, the meat packing facility where everybody's jammed next to each other, and I think that throws more hurdles in how you can and if you can accommodate and still provide and comply with the OSHA guidance to provide a safe workforce or workplace.
Or a nurse. We just saw that big case, or a hospital nurses or a nursing home, where the risk of an unvaccinated worker, even if they're behind the desk, if they're taking care of elderly people, even vaccinated ones, that's gonna increase your risk, right? We're always measuring risk as lawyers, and we're always trying to advise you as HR on what is going to mitigate your risk. And what's an acceptable level of risk is going to depend on the industry in conjunction with following state and local guidance.
A lot of people asking in the comments, as soon as we started talking about testing, who pays for it? Sid, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my strict legal answer is I think you could require the employee to do it. I think from a practical perspective and from trying to maintain some level of morale with now an disgruntled or unhappy employee, I think the employer should probably. I would advise the employer to just step up and pay the $20 per test.
Yeah, same,
Agreed.
Especially if they mandate it. I mean, if they mandate it,
Right.
an employer mandates it, I would say pay for it.
And the other
But I
question
agree with you in
too
general.
is traveling, are they getting the test at home? Are they getting the test at the work site? Are they getting the test, do they have to go to some offsite, go to, Walgreens, for instance, or something like that and get tested? I mean, are you going to pay for the employees' times traveling there and waiting to get the test? And then traveling back to the work site. I mean, those are all the things that, could, I don't necessarily, I mean, I think there's a debate on both sides. There's not a clear cut answer. I don't think if you're making a determined condition of employment that you have to be tested before you arrive at work every day, I could see plaintiffs' lawyers making the argument that time is compensable work time because the employee can't use it for their own benefit.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Yes. Have them clock in and then test.
Yep.
Well, and the other thing too is at least until the end of September, you can use that can be FFCRA leave.
Right.
If you have under 500 employees, they can get paid for that time off. So it's
Well, only for the vaccine. I mean, to get the vaccine, not to get tested.
the
vaccine.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably right. Just for precaution, you're probably right. How about booster shots? Should we talk about booster shots? I ran a poll on my blog a few weeks ago, was it a week ago now, about who's thinking about mandating booster shots as part of it. Take a step back. Let's assume your business is mandating vaccinations, right? Who is then going to go the next step and mandate the booster shot, or is at least strongly considering it? It was a pretty low number. If I remember correctly, I want to say it was about maybe 1 in 5. What are you hearing from clients in terms of whether they're going to mandate boosters, and what are some of the legal considerations, if any, that differ between mandating vaccines now and then mandating the booster? I'll toss that out to anyone who wants it.
0. I'm hearing 0 about mandating boosters.
Yeah.
Same here.
My clients are still worried about the first round without having to worry about the next round. And given that, I think, remember that it's the severely immunocompromised and the like who are going to be first eligible. That's not going to be until this month. I guess we're in September now. I think when you start talking about the workforce as a whole, employers are going to be very happy to kick that booster shot can down the road to January, February, when it starts to become acute.
Well, right. And the other issue too is the booster is only available, only through Pfizer. So if I have Moderna, now that's probably next to be approved for booster, but it's not there yet. Johnson & Johnson, the CDC has said that's a little ways down the line. So now we get into a situation in which we have to double check to see what specific vaccine everyone got, and now police for boosters. I don't know. I don't think anyone in HR signed up for that. That seems pretty difficult at this point. But speaking of what no one in HR signed up for, how about the Vax cards themselves? And let me say this now. Let me reset. All right, 12:30. Everyone, thank you for attending today. I'm Eric. That's David. Oh, the other way. That's David. That's Sid. Let's see. Down there is Amy. We're all partners at Fisher Broyles. Thank you for joining us for what everyone needs to know what everyone in HR needs to know about mandatory vaccines. I had a post today about phony vaccine cards, and the post talked about an arrest or a series of arrests in New York for someone on Instagram who was selling phony vaccine cards, and there was an accomplice allegedly who was putting people's information into the New York vaccination system. It was really dangerous stuff. And the people who actually purchased the cards were arrested as well. And then I included some tips that I found on the internet, okay, folks? And then I looked at my card too, to see how you could sleuth out potentially a phony vax card. Now, I just want to clear a few things up. One of the things I said was look for a sticker on the vax card that shows it like comes off the little vaccine vial and it's stuck onto your card. That shows that you got one of the lots of Moderna or Pfizer. And I got a bunch of emails back saying that I can assure you I got vaccinated and I don't have a sticker. Okay, maybe the sticker isn't the best thing in the world. Another comment I got was, well, if there are 2 different doses, then the handwriting should be different for dose 1 and dose 2, unless you had the same person administer both doses. That would be a tell, right? And I got a lot of emails back saying, but I did have the same person administer dose 1 and dose 2. So I don't know. Your mileage may vary. I'm not suggesting that anyone in HR should be the vaccine card police, but right, there are some best practices with dealing with getting proof of vaccination. So I don't know, does anyone want to lead off and talk about just how generally to go about getting proof of vaccination in a way that's not going to subject you to a lawsuit? Anyone want to take a crack at that? Otherwise, I can start.
Yeah, this sounds like you're this is your wheelhouse, Eric. Go for it.
Okay. All right. Well, the first thing is proof of vaccination or someone's vaccination status, in case anyone doesn't know this yet, and that's okay. It's not protected under HIPAA. All right. So most businesses, most employers are not healthcare insurers, and they're not dealing with that part. They're not considered covered entities. So asking someone about their vaccination status, someone's vaccination status is not protected health information. That said, when you get that proof of vaccination, right, maybe you're asking someone to just email you a copy of their card or to hand you a copy of their card to inspect, kind of like you're doing an I-9 type thing, right? Once you have that information should be protected as as any other medical information. So I always, think old school in terms of putting it into a physical file. I know no one does that anymore, but just keep it in a separate electronic file where people, the average person doesn't have access to it. Keep it protected. The other thing I want to point out too, and this is from the EEOC, and I don't think this has really been tested yet, but I wouldn't want to be the test case. And that is, we talked at some point about having people basically let others know that they are vaccinated by having some kind of a sticker or something as kind of the belt and suspenders to the vax card. And the EEOC has since come out, and I apologize, I don't have it open in front of me, but their language is along the lines of, some kind of identifier that shows that you've been vaccinated or that shows something like that could be private and shouldn't be displayed. So the idea of having someone wear a bracelet or a sticker or something like that, I think is not a great idea beyond just the initial, they turn in the vax card to show that they've been vaccinated. So that's my 2 cents on that. Does anyone have anything to add to my long soliloquy on vaccinations?
Let me just kind of question a little bit that EEOC guidance, probably in a guidance or letter and the like. Don't we have the reverse? If we're requiring all of our employees who are not vaccinated to be wearing masks or that would be the most ostentatious sign. Haven't we just flipped that? And so the 95% who are vaccinated, they don't have to identify, but the 5% who aren't they do have to identify, and why would that change the equation from the EEOC's perspective?
Theoretically, yeah. I mean, I suppose that could work too. I think as a practical matter now, with the CDC guidance that in indoor public settings where there's substantially or high transmission rates that everyone should be masking up, I think that pretty much does away with the stigma of people wearing a sticker or whatever to show that they're vaxxed versus unvaxxed. I mean, that was kind of the big thing. And we were worried about these schisms in the workplace and this caste system of vaxxed versus unvaxxed. But really, employers, if you're in indoor settings, everyone should be masked up at this point if you're working around other people until the CDC says otherwise. I mean, some states or localities may have mandates, but the CDC guidance, as a lawyer, if a client came to me and said, should we be masking up? I'd say, yeah, because that's what the CDC says. And if down the line you're ever faced with a lawsuit related to some kind of COVID outbreak or something like that in the workplace, you can say, what else did you want us to do? Like, we followed the CDC guidance. Everyone masked up. So.
The other side of that too is also, even if it's not mandated, by the locality or a state, that everybody wear a mask indoors, just because there's plenty of people who are fully vaccinated and still voluntarily choose to wear a mask indoors, as opposed to, an employer may require all employees who are unvaccinated to wear masks. And even if they want to let the vaccinated folks not wear masks, but they can still do so if they choose. I think that removes a little bit of the identifier of who's vaccinated and who's not from it, because anybody can choose to wear a mask if they want to, as opposed to prohibiting vaccinated employees from wearing masks, for instance. That would create that division that we're talking about.
Yes, don't do that. Don't prohibit vaccinated.
I was not suggesting.
Please don't. What about in terms of locale and whether to mandate vaccinations, right? So maybe this isn't so much a legal issue as it is kind of more of a pragmatic business issue, right? So there's been a big push from the government all the way up to President Biden saying, look, we want employers to mandate vaccines. But if you operate a workplace where everyone's outside or everyone's remote, right? Does it make sense to mandate vaccines for those workplaces? I don't know. Amy, what do you think?
I mean, you're going to have major issues if you're in New York City, right? So if you're in New York, any New Yorkers out there, you have the HEROES Act prevention plan that you're going to want to have, that was effective as of August 5th, 2021. And now, most recently, the key to NYC, where any indoor spaces, that have a roof or overhang or walls, like 3 or more walls or something, they have to check for vaccine status, and they have to ask for proof. And there's a whole host of aspects to consider. If you're a restaurant, a bar, a nightclub, a gym, anywhere where food could be served, even like in hotels or in malls or any business that provides catering or a grocery store, anything like that, all need to be vaccinated and show proof of vaccines for employees and for customers. So it's really going to depend on where you are. And then you have some states, of course, where, there's vaccine prohibitions, right, which are currently the subject of litigation all over the country down south. So it's going to be, yeah, and in Montana too. It's going to be so location dependent. I mean, Florida, the litigation in Florida is all over the place, between the schools and employers. But at least in New York, you have a lot to comply with. And I think you're going to see more employers mandating the vaccine, of course, in New York. Not every employer, of course, operates any kind of food but a good many do. And if you do, you're going to be mandating.
Heather just wrote in the comments, the New York State Bar Association is trying to have employers within New York mandate vaccinations. Yep. Posted about that on Friday.
Posted about that.
Yeah.
Right.
So there is certainly a strong push to get everyone vaccinated, but I know one of the carve-outs in the New York State Bar Association report, in their August report, where they say, look, we want people to get vaccinated. There's really no legal impediment to requiring vaccinations. The Department of Justice has said it's okay, even for EUA, emergency use authorization. A Texas federal court has said it's okay. The EEOC has said it's okay. But if you're in a unionized workplace, it may not be as easy as snapping your fingers and saying we're mandating vaccinations. Since you're smiling. Do you want to talk a little bit about organized labor and mandating vaccines?
And I do a fair amount of work in healthcare, and I will observe that there is some irony to the fact that 12 months ago, many of the same people who are now saying you should not be mandating vaccines were raising concerns regarding the safety of the workplace and claiming that their employer was not doing everything that they could to protect their safety. Yeah, I mean, look, this is going to be very dependent on, if you're in a unionized workforce, what your collective bargaining agreement permits you to do. And if you are permitted to unilaterally implement work rules or health and safety rules, perhaps, or whatever that permits, then yes, you can just go ahead and change the work rules. Otherwise, generally, courts have looked at this and said that this would be changing a work rule, that is implementing, we know from the flu vaccine, where employers try to do that. And most courts have taken the position, coming up from the NLRB, that is a mandatory subject of bargaining. And what that means is, if you implement that without having bargained with the union, then potentially you've committed an unfair labor practice. You're going to wind up in front of the National Labor Relations Board, so on and so forth. Now, politically, how that all plays out, because we digress a little bit, but the NLRB being a fairly political body, how that would play out with the federal requirements and the like, that is yet to be seen. But an employer in a unionized workforce, if they don't have the right to unilaterally implement work rules or health and safety rules, this is a mandatory subject of bargaining.
Yeah, and that's no different in New York. The HEROES Act prevention plan that New York employers have to have, it either has to have agreement by the union rep, the collective bargaining agreement, or by a consensus of employees, not a consensus, a group of employees designated to work with management on it. It's no different.
How about this idea of not mandating vaccines, but in order to encourage people to get vaccinated, instead of dangling the carrot, we'll wield the stick, kind of like what a major airline has done with charging a $200 insurance surcharge for people who are unvaccinated. David, have you explored this issue with clients or looked into it, other than what you've read from Delta?
Yeah, so I haven't had any clients specifically come up and say that we're going to, other than mandating, and then if you're not vaccinated, we're going to term you, excuse me, about using the stick approach. I do have, some concerns with, the using a stick. I've heard in some places people or employers may consider fining employees that aren't going to be vaccinated, and you got to be careful with that, because depending upon how much the employee makes, if you're going to deduct it from their pay, you could, if you're an exempt employee, you could lose the exemption. You could potentially drop the employee below the minimum wage and run afoul of the minimum wage laws. Or you could just run afoul of a state wage and hour law in that regard. I won't pretend to be a benefits lawyer, but in terms of the health insurance and charging you more for health insurance if you are not vaccinated, I do have some concerns under the Affordable Care Act as to whether or not that could run afoul of the Affordable Care Act, and specifically the whether or not it could be, deemed to be treating or not covering or putting a barrier in place of covering a pre-existing condition of some kind. And that could run seriously afoul of the ACA. But I think those issues are going to make their way through the courts at some point in time. But like I said, I'm not going to pretend to be a benefits lawyer on that one. But yeah, I think the stick approach is a little bit more, is a lot riskier than the carrot approach, as you put it.
We've got about 15 minutes left, 13 minutes left. I want to get to some of the audience questions. First question I want to toss out to Amy. I'll scroll through them. Laura has asked adverse impact on people of color. So if we have a mandatory vaccination rule, could we have a disparate impact claim brought by persons of color who are percentage-wise, statistically, not getting the vaccines as much as others?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because if you weren't going to, I was going to interrupt because I saw that in the chat as well. That's definitely a consideration. I mean, you want to take all of these issues into consideration like you do any other HR policy. I mean, you want to consider if there's a disparate impact on any minority group, again, depending on the demographics of your workplace. I mean, you could have a workplace that, has a wide range of diverse individuals in it, and you can have the opposite. It just is going to depend. But I do think that attention has to be paid to people of color and their responses to the vaccine, which have long been, mistrust of government vaccines and things like that. Now, by the same token, I think that brings us to where folks were before you could mandate a vaccine, right? And before the FDA approved it, which was encouraging and incentivizing people to get vaccines. The CDC has a fantastic toolkit that employers can use to explain to everyone in your workforce, and especially if you have reticent employees, who, because they've been traditionally marginalized, are afraid to get the vaccine. There's so much information with this toolkit, and I can put a link into the chat if I can find it. PowerPoints and social media messages and fact sheets for employees and sample letters, no problem, Annie. All of that it's such a great way to have people understand, what is actually in the vaccine, what any adverse reactions are going to look like, and the efficacy of it. So I would say that, do that analysis just like you would if you were doing, a RIF or a layoff or whatever, and consider whether you need to beef up your education incentivization efforts. That's what I would say.
And part of that toolkit, as I recall, is having a vaccine champion, so to speak, or role models who, says 4 white people who are doing this Zoom. But I would think having people of color who have gotten the vaccines and can speak to the efficacy of the vaccines and going through it, and how it's it's no different than I don't know, going to the doctor for anything else kind of trivial. That might help in terms of promoting vaccinations within the organization.
And Eric, is it fair to say that the baseline of all of our conversations about mandating is that we have a robust education and volunteer program in place? I mean, so that seems to me a baseline for any employer. Is you don't want to be just walking in and saying, oh, this is our first discussion of COVID, everybody should be mandated, everybody, should be vaccinated, and the mandate will be in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, whatever that will be. There hopefully has been a long education program as well. But speaking to the potential legal side to that, as opposed to the social and moral side to that, if the employer is in the workplace offering vaccines, whether it's through a third party or they're a healthcare provider and they can actually do it themselves, I think from a legal standpoint, you're probably not going to be at great risk in terms of a disparate impact because everybody is being offered the same part to that. Again, that doesn't speak to the moral and the social dynamics of it, just the simple legal aspect of it.
Right.
Another question, I'll pose this one to David. Let's assume either we're in the process of mandated vaccines or we have a voluntary system we encourage and we track who is vaccinated. So there is, either way, there's a portion of the employee population that is not vaccinated. Can we share that information with their managers? So
No. Yeah, no, that would not be information that I'd be wanting to share around and pass around putting aside the legal implications of that or the legal prohibitions on that. I don't want it. That's just going to create, from a employee morale issue, that could create all sorts of rifts and issues within your workplace. But yeah, you could, I wouldn't want to be going around and disclosing the vaccination status. Like we said, the vaccine card should be kept separate in a separate medical file. And you want to keep that confidential. There are certain circumstances where people can be made aware of that information in the medical file, on a, what I'll call a, need to know basis of some kind. But no, I would not just go around sharing that information among the workforce.
Yep. Amy, you're back. Got worried there.
No, I wasn't God. It's just, I was telling these guys before we lost power, so I'm not in my office.
Here's a question. I'll pose this to Sid. Again, not necessarily mandating vaccinations. Maybe we're just incentivizing, but it could be combined with mandating. If you go get vaccinated, we're going to give you a couple $100, right? How does it work for people who have a religious or health-related issue with getting vaccinated, right? So on the one hand, no, they don't have to get vaccinated, assuming it's valid and we can accommodate them. But do we have to give them $200 too?
I would say yes. I would not want to be drawing that distinction and saying that we are, because that's a disparate treatment issue with respect to whatever the underlying basis is. And I think again, from both a legal but also from a practical perspective, the answer is yes. If you have a valid exception, then that person is being treated like everybody else in the workforce, and the answer is yes. We didn't pre-screen that. I don't know. Does everybody else agree with that?
I think that's probably right, because they're doing everything else possible. They're going to wear the PPE. They're going to otherwise abide, right? They're not refusing to, well, let's assume it's someone who can wear a mask but just can't get vaccinated. Yeah, I think you're probably right. Although what's sticking in my brain, rattling around in there in that empty space is for folks who take FMLA and you have perfect attendance awards. You don't have to give the person on FMLA the perfect attendance bonus if they miss work because of FMLA, because they could miss work for any other reason and they wouldn't be entitled to the perfect attendance award. So I realize we probably should have pre-scripted this one, so I'm not going to hold you to it, Sid, but I think your at least your pragmatism rings through for sure.
Well, but the reason that you're not in this context, that you're not getting the vaccine, let's assume that you've screened out all of the bogus reasons. And so this is somebody who is now presenting a legitimate basis. There are going to be, in whatever workforce, there's going to be 7%, whatever, I'm making up that number, but let's assume about 7% of the workforce that has a legitimate basis, either disability or otherwise, or religious. And to exclude those folks from what the other folks are doing, I think that would be problematic.
I think that a lot of this, and I'm sorry to hijack your moderation, Eric. I think a lot of this can be handled with a really good understanding of the interactive process and engaging in it and documenting it and really working with your employees to understand what their issues are and figure out how you can alleviate those concerns. Of course, you need to do that, anyway, for disability and for religious exemptions, but I think you're going to end up looking at that for a lot of different aspects of employment with the vaccines. The vaccines aren't going anywhere. The Delta variant doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and other variants crop up the longer people are not vaccinated for whatever reason, right? But I think that the interactive process is such an unsung hero and is so vital to what you're doing as HR professionals, and documenting that, which is like my biggest, I was going to say pet peeve, but it's not a pet peeve, but it's the thing I emphasize the most to clients, is that interactive process can save you every time, and not documenting it, will so often get people in trouble. So, sitting down with that employee, keeping in mind that you have to do this on an ongoing basis. If there's any kind of physical or mental health issue, and as I'm sure everyone knows, mental health issues are skyrocketing right now, and figuring out what we can do. What can we do here?
Some people have asked, what about unpaid leave as an accommodation? I think that's so wonderfully passive aggressive. Saying to someone, oh, no, don't worry about it. You don't have to get the vaccine. You can take all the unpaid time off that you need. I kind of like that. The issue is it that there's another accommodation that allows them to work and earn a living, and you don't offer that to them.
Right.
At the end, you're probably going to be screwed, because it's one of those situations where, just typical ADA setting, you don't want to transfer someone into a position where they're making less money or it's going to be harder work. That's an accommodation of last resort. So yes, while the employer does get to choose the accommodation as long as it's reasonable, I don't know, conceivably unpaid leave could work, and it could certainly incentivize someone to get vaccinated. If there are other ones available, I'd say, just let the wave wash over you and go with one of those. I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We're at the 1 o'clock hour. I want to give everyone on the panel a chance to give some closing thoughts and let people know how to contact them if they want to. I'm going to post our information in the chat window right now, and I will turn it over real quickly to David. Let everyone know what you got going on, and how people can get in touch with you. Any parting shots?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And Eric, you posted my LinkedIn information in there. It has all the relevant details on how to get a hold of me. Email me if you have questions or want to follow up at david.renner@fisherbroyles.com. Happy to further the discussion. Very happy to be here and enjoyed the discussion. And I think that there's a lot of good. We came up with a lot of good takeaways for everybody to walk away with here and go back to their. For HR to go back to their workplace and really think about.
Amy, parting shots?
Sure. And thank you, Eric, for hosting this and for posting my information. Oh, fellow chief, yay. You can get in touch with me anytime at amy.epsteingluck@fisherbroyles.com or on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect. I'm very active on Eric's posts as well as my own. And my parting shots would be document everything, take a deep breath, take it one step at a time, and call your outside employment counsel.
And Sid, first time here. I mean,
First time, first time, long time, right?
Yeah.
No, this has been great fun. It really has. And this is kind of stuff that we all have bounced around with each other, and it's really been a pleasure. I'll give you my direct email as well. Obviously, theoretical questions only, as Eric said. It's Sydney with an I, SIDNEY, .Steinberg at FisherBroyles.com. This has been a lot of fun, and I completely agree with Amy. Document, document, document.
And folks, I will leave you with this. Yes, I'm recording this. Yes, I will upload it to YouTube today. And yes, I will post a link on the blog, or it will be in the email newsletter somewhere, one way or another. You'll have access to it. Share it with your friends. Thank you, everyone, for showing out today. We really appreciated it. I did remember to hit the record button, so that's great. And everyone, enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thank you, and goodbye.